Hello and welcome to this evening's Empower Hour. I'll now do the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge with respect as non-native people, the land on which we stand, live, and learn is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. Let us seek to understand what it means to be in right relationship today with the traditional stewards of this land and with the land itself and all of the creatures that inhabit it. And now I would like to move on to the introduction. Unfortunately, tonight we will not be joined by Ann Arbor Mayor Christopher Taylor. However, Missy Stults, PhD and Director of the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, is here to discuss the sustainable electric utility in Ann Arbor. Dr. Missy Stults works with all city operations, residents, and businesses, the University of Michigan, nonprofits, and others to make Ann Arbor one of the most sustainable and equitable cities in America. Prior to joining the city of Ann Arbor, Missy worked with local governments and indigenous communities around the nation to advance their climate and sustainability goals, including during her time as the climate director at ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and as a consultant to philanthropic organizations. Missy has a PhD in urban resilience from the University of Michigan, a master's in climate and society from Columbia University, and undergraduate degrees in marine biology and environmental science from the University of New England. Holy cow, huh? That is some amazing background. A fun fact about Missy is that she loves doing puzzles, and her family tries to get her the hardest one they can find every year. I assume that's for birthday or holidays. Thank you so much, Missy, for joining us today. I'll let you take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Mary. And thanks everybody for being here. Sadly, you are correct. I am not the mayor, but I am lucky enough to get to work with him regularly. So I will channel my Christopher Taylor, and hopefully we'll get all your questions answered and resolved. So excited to talk to you today about the SEU. It is America's youngest utility. It was officially born on April 17th of 2025. Very exciting. We call it the SEU, so you may hear me kind of slip in and out of that language. And I'll talk a little bit throughout the presentation about what the SEU is and how it differs from some of the other SEUs and strategies that have been deployed as we think about the transition to clean energy in our system. So in our time together tonight, I'm just going to give a little context. We all probably know that local governments are creatures of the state. States are the original sovereigns. And so the way things work in Michigan is not the way things work in Colorado. So I want to give you the kind of landscape, the ecosystem, the sauce in which we're operating, which helps indicate why we took the path we took. I'll share a little bit about the vision that emerged and where we are then in process of creating the SEU and what's kind of on the horizon. Then we'll just have fun discussion. Noting I talk really fast, it is well known. I will try to slow down, but I promise you I will fail, and then I will go fast again. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring it, happy to go back. This is just something that I really am passionate about, and I tend to go fast when that happens. So let me start with the context. Ann Arbor, just like Boulder and many other municipalities, does an annual greenhouse gas emissions inventory. You've already heard we have this goal of a just transition to community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. That's called A20. It's why you see that logo there. That is the program that I created at the city. And so I and the team, the Office of Sustainability, we're the caretakers of that goal, that plan, that framework, and all of the actions. So every year we're doing our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, following ISO standards and the protocols that are available. And what we know is our emissions, we look different than many other places. Most of our emissions are coming from our buildings. When you look at how we heat, cool, light, etc. in our spaces, we see that roughly almost 70% of our emissions profile is coming from buildings. That's a really important sector. And that does look different than other spaces where transportation is the largest emissions source. So for us, we're very, very centered on how we can decarbonize our buildings. And hey, we're electrifying, right? And so we're only going to shift emissions. We're electrifying vehicles as well. So anything we can do in the landscape of beneficial electrification and decarbonization of the electric system has a notable impact. And I teed up already, we've got this A20 goal. It's also, A20 is the brand, right? So I talk about it as a goal. I talk about it as a plan. I talk about it as individual strategies, because to the public, A20 is it. And everything we're doing falls under that. So tonight I'm not gonna belabor the 70 plus things my office is leading. I'm gonna focus on this one here. So our energy profile landscape is important as well. So we've got our emissions. We also know in Michigan, we have our VGP, our voluntary green pricing program. That is basically, it's a kind of REC Plus program where it is new additional renewables being built. But Ann Arbor is the largest subscriber in our IOU service territory. So we've got this renewable commitment that's part of an RPS. You've got these slivers where our Ann Arbor public schools signed up for commitments. We've signed up for certain commitments. We're installing certain things. We have dams. And so we kind of like looked at this pie and we're like, oh man, we've got 81% of the electricity in our system that is just not clean, right? So that's the gap we've got to figure out how to close. How in the world are we going to do that? And when I tell you, of course, I took this for granted. I sort of jumped in. We've got a goal of 100% renewable energy powering that electricity system too, right? Of course we do if we're trying to be carbon neutral. So I apologize for taking that completely for granted. So we've got to figure out how we're changing those electrons. Well, very fortunately, about a year ago, the legislature in Michigan passed a series of clean energy bills that actually set the RPS at 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2035. So that just drastically changed what the scenario looks like as we fast forward to our goal year of 2030. We also saw Ann Arbor Public Schools sign up for major renewable energy commitments. The University of Michigan is starting to make some investments and installations of their own. And so the good news, a gap of 81% got closed to needing to figure out 27% of the system from a purely greenhouse gas emission standpoint. Now, many of you on the phone are motivated by other things than greenhouse gas emissions. I recognize that, I am too, and I'll talk about kind of the intersectionality of those different values. But this is the kind of ingredients that we were working with as we were thinking about our future. The other thing is the legislative landscape, the regulatory landscape. In Michigan, we have something known as the Foot Act. It was passed in the early 1900s. Excuse me, and this regulates franchises. So your franchise is your right to serve. You know this well. Boulder obviously negotiated during franchise discussions with Excel. We have a franchise that existed before the Foot Act. The Foot Act passed in Michigan and said franchises have to be negotiable. However, if you have a franchise before the passing of this act, it's considered in perpetuity. We have an electric franchise that existed before that act. So our electric franchise is non-negotiable. It has been ruled by the courts repeatedly to be in perpetuity. So we never had the chance to go negotiate like Winter Park, Florida did, or Boulder, or Minneapolis is doing right now, or Eugene, Oregon, or our friends in San Diego. That's not even an option that we have. So this is already one of the unique variables we were working with. Now I'm going to pause and tell you, this is only true on the electric side. On the heating side or the traditional gas side, we can. And in fact, on April 22nd, we signed the first gas franchise in the country to include a climate commitment with our utility. And I'm really, really proud of that. I think it's moving the industry in remarkable ways. It's a short franchise. We only did 10 years. We got funding for network geothermal, funding for biodigester, funding for energy efficiency work, commitments on data coordination. So you can use this franchise, and you know this better than anyone, in very powerful ways. Just on the electric side, we can't. So that's part of the context. However, what is true in Michigan law is those Foot Act franchises, the ones that are in perpetuity, are not exclusive. Michigan law, the Michigan Constitution in particular, preserves the rights of cities and villages. It is silent on towns and counties. So explicitly cities and villages have the right to compete, or to take over a franchise. So what that means in practice is another utility cannot come in, but we could form our own utility, or we could compete with that utility in some way, shape, or form. So we could buy out, we could municipalize in a traditional sense. We could create something that competes with that utility. And then, of course, you can do the things. You can continue the way it is and just be like, oh, our hands are tied. You can push for new regulatory policies and laws, like your comments you're submitting before your PUC. As soon as we are done on the phone tonight, we'll be reading our comments for the PUC because we intervene in regulatory cases. And you can get creative and try to find other things. For us, we were in deep conversations, and municipalization, we evaluated it and it did not make our climate plan. There was just no universe in which we were going to hit a full municipalization by 2030 and have clean electrons on the grid, right? So that was sort of put in the background. Now we do have constituents who are pushing for a traditional municipalization effort. I'm pretty skeptical of it. I do not want to own the failing infrastructure that we have. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. That doesn't mean I don't think there's a place for it. But if you came to me and made an argument that was a climate argument, you're probably not going to win me. And if you came and you make a short-term economic argument, you definitely lost me. So you're going to have to think long-term in that space. We were looking at community choice aggregation, and we just cannot get the legislature to move. So we've got this municipalization conversation. We've got this CCA legislation conversation that's emerging. And in the middle of it was this idea of what's known as CCA 3.0, where you have choice and it's community choice, but it's focused on local generation. And then we started thinking, well, wait, historically, it's never made sense to try to stand up a competing utility. I mean, imagine, I'm looking outside, the IOU's utility running on one side of the street and the municipal utility on the other. Like, you're not going to have enough rate base to cover that. That's a lot of cost. But there are inherent assumptions in that. Assumptions that you need to have distribution. You need to have big distribution. You got to tie into transmission systems. And we started to question, is that actually what we're saying? Is that what we want? And the answer for us was, no, it's not. We have a deeply unreliable grid here. We lose power regularly. We have climate change disrupting that grid more. We have clean energy goals, as you know. We have affordability problems. We have the highest electric rates in the Midwest. And so we started to say, what would it look like if we addressed those four things? Resilience, reliability, affordability, and clean energy in the system. And what those things lead you to is decentralization. The most vulnerable part about an electric system is the distribution. So don't do distribution, or do isolated distribution. And we sort of sat around a table and like, oh my gosh, can we do this? And the answer was yes, you can technically do this. Of course, I am sitting in a home. Many of you are probably in homes that have solar and storage, right? Like, of course you can install these systems. So technically, not a problem. Economically, yeah, solar has an ROI, you're all set. We have such an unreliable system. People are buying generators. Well, a battery is so much better than a generator, and the economics are far superior. Excellent. So technically, economically, we passed. Legally, it's clearly allowed. So the last question was socially, does the public want this? And so we've been exploring this for about 3 years. And here's what we landed on. This idea of a community-owned utility that is supplemental. It is not a takeover of an existing utility. It is optional. No one has to take service, but everyone can take service. It's a utility that's focused on generating clean energy. It is not a utility that is focused on moving electrons from A to B. There are parts of that utility that will do that, but it is not the primary driver. It is about fundamentally generating clean energy that powers our homes, our businesses, our houses of worship, our major institutions. It provides choice that so many people don't have. I happen to be a cisgender, white, affluent, overly educated woman. I can afford to get solar. The market serves me. I can go out and get a loan and I can move that forward. But many people cannot. And so giving more choice to people who realistically do not have it is a good thing. It's supplemental. So the way we've actually designed it is it's first in. So your first electrons come from the SEU, and then you pull from the IOU as well. And I can talk about some of the technical elements. I am not an electrical engineer, y'all. So if you want to get into like one-line diagrams, I can only take you so far. But what we do know is that the SEU has been designed for critical load. So no, you're not powering your toothbrush. No, you're not having a movie fest and binging on Netflix, but you are able to ensure you've got heat, you've got your groceries preserved, right? Basic needs are sort of met in that moment, and the utility can grow. So this was the vision of the sustainable energy utility. And we got very specific and we looked at what could it actually do. And punchline, I already told you we exist. In November, voters authorized the creation of this utility. It passed with almost 79% of the voters saying, please create this. So it's authorized. I mean, it's generation, right? So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are generation focused. We can do solar and storage that has been authorized by the voters, focusing on reliability improvements. We can do network geothermal or individual geothermal systems. Of course, clean energy for heating. We're both in cool climates. We know this is important. We certainly can do cold climate air source heat pumps where that makes sense. And sometimes it does. We have radiant heating. In that case, it's a very logical transition over. But because electric rates are high, we do have to be careful, especially in low income situations with exacerbating energy burden and poverty. Hence, network geothermal is proving to be a really interesting possibility here. We can also do energy efficiency. That was authorized. Electrification programs were authorized so we can help support people with their transition. We can do on-bill finance. Wind is not particularly viable. We don't have a lot of undeveloped land. Now we can do small wind, think like rooftop systems in the downtown where we've got wind corridors. So that's also authorized by the voters. Not a single electron can be from a fossil system though. It's not allowed. The SEU cannot touch gas, right? Fossil gas is not clean. You cannot touch it in the system. We do think that we can do a biodigester at our wastewater treatment plant because humans are going to keep pooping. So we're not generating more poop, but no CAFO, no animal, that's all off limits, right? So generation is key. We also are authorized to do neighborhood microgridding. So this is where we do get into some distribution and the rationale, and I'm sorry, I know you can't see my home. I happen to sit in a 2-story. My neighborhood is largely ranches with a basement. We were the last house to be built. So we're all the basement infill is our foundation. So we don't have a basement. We sit higher than the rest of the houses. That means we have incredible solar potential. Our neighbors, Peter and John, are wonderful. They have glorious trees and they have almost new solar potential. Well, we can generate a lot more solar than what we need. So the idea here is that you balance in a neighborhood, think 10, 15, maybe 20 houses sharing power through that networked microgrid. The key here is you have to have a density of adoption to make the economics actually work because you've got to run that line. But that is not your big distribution that you see out in front. That is easements between the houses to bury a line. That's a pretty small line, right? My house is maybe 10 feet away from our neighbors. That's the kind of distribution that we're talking about. So we're using the term microgrid. It's not technically a microgrid. We're not really sure what the term is going to be, the term du jour, if you will. We're trying to define it together, but we'll go for microgrid just for ease of communication. And then over time, we can expand to have some larger distribution. Think community solar with a school being the anchor, and then you're connecting kind of in. So we're in collaborations and deep discussions with our schools right now to purchase a lot of the solar systems they've installed and expand those systems, do more carports, because in our case, schools, especially elementary schools, are in neighborhoods. So they're really nice anchors to be able to connect and distribute through. Schools also have really big playgrounds, so we could do network geothermal with the actual well field being in the school playground because it returns to a playground, right? As soon as you're done with your wells, no one's the wiser for what's actually underground. So that's the service. Well, these are the services that the SEU is authorized to provide. So I'm going to pivot quickly here to where we are in process. The voters authorized the SEU in November. In January, we started in earnest. We are telling people we're 18 to 24 months before you'll actually see a service from the utility. There are some things we're working on that if they materialize, it'll be quicker. There are many things that if they don't come, it will be later, right? So we're just trying to be very open and transparent with the public about how things are unfolding. So we have amended the charter. The SEU exists, right? I told you it was born. The the ordinance that created the executive director, the governance structure, all of that has passed. We are incubating the SEU as a department of the city. It is not starting as a separate entity. And the strongest argument I can give you for that is it doesn't exist, right? Like, it exists only in paper. And so it doesn't have a bond rating. It doesn't have customer service. It doesn't have a billing system yet. We're working on standing all of those up. But if we want this to succeed, instead of like pushing it out the door, the city has decided to warm embrace it, to give it the hug, to let it come in and have all of the institutional knowledge and support systems we have as it's growing and getting its own feet. It can eventually spin out to be its own quasi-governmental entity with its own board, but it will not start that way. It will start with an executive director that will report directly to the city administrator, just like I do. Excuse me. We are hiring for the ED. We have our 5 finalists. So we're working through that process. They will be the first ED. They will work very closely with my office, of course, because we're deeply aligned. And my office runs a lot of the programs that are foundational to the sustainable energy utility. So we've got some work to do there. We are actively doing stakeholder engagement. Every 2 weeks, I send out just a 1-page kind of update to the public on how we're advancing with developing the SEU. And then I sneak in a little bit of other sustainability stuff because I've got a captive audience. But that's meant to kind of have a nice rhythm so folks know how things are emerging. We have a pretty detailed work plan that we're executing on. Some of the new things that are kind of right on the horizon. We're going to be putting an RFP out for our rate firm. We need someone to do cost of service analyses with us, but also to be beside us through that process. As we kind of like look out 6 to 12 months, which shockingly is coming up really soon. We're doing a series of open houses with contractors. A lot of people want to sell us stuff, y'all. I think I did not recognize how many people would come out of the woodwork to say, I've got your billing solution. I've got your solar solution. I have your racking solution. I know how you microgrid. Here are your control functions. And, you know, I don't do this every day. And no one on our team does. So instead of trying to figure this out on their own, what we've decided to do is basically host a series of open houses where we invite people who do microgrid controls to come in and pitch us. And excuse me, they'll pitch us on whatever product that they have, but we have a series of questions to understand the technical parameters of their operations, of their system, what makes it effective, how does it interconnect with other systems? And then we'll use the information we gain from those open houses to write our request for proposals, right? So we're going to use the market to help shape the final end product that we're going to go to market and procure. So we're starting to work on those as we speak right now. We've been in conversations with folks for billing systems. Tomorrow I have an in-person meeting to talk about the meters we're going to use, or at least start thinking about the meters. We did win a $10 million US Department of Energy grant to build our network geothermal, our first network geothermal system. The world sucks right now. So we're waiting to see if that actually materializes. We're pushing pretty hard for it, but that would be the first test of network geothermal for us. And in Michigan, we have very clear laws that say you have to meter, and that metering has to vary with consumption levels. Well, geothermal is kind of tricky in terms of like, what are we metering there? So we're going to use it as a pilot to try to answer those questions. Hopefully we'll be breaking ground in the fall on that system, assuming the grant award actually comes through. And then we're in that RFP process of trying to hire our solar installers, because we're not gonna have staffed solar installers, right? We're gonna use the marketplace, but we need to figure out who's our customer service and what does that look like? Of course, our billing software. There's just a lot of institutional work that's moving forward, and the goal is around summer next year. Hopefully, we can launch something that might be the first neighborhood, that might be an anchor with a series of schools. That might be a big partnership with the University of Michigan. All of those things are in discussions and explorations at the moment. But I would say one of the things I sort of took for granted is as soon as it passed, the emails came in droves for people asking, including my neighbors who like stopped me on the street and like, when do I get my battery? When do I get this? The answer is, I'll see you in like 18 months, right? But you also have to figure out the easements, because I'm putting something on your roof. What happens if someone disconnects from the system? How much do they pay to take the system off, if at all, if they need a roof replacement? How long does your roof need to be viable before I put solar on it? How many people need to subscribe before I seriously consider network geothermal, right? These are the questions and the economic analyses that we're modeling and trying to understand right now. So it's really fun, terrible, awesome, amazing, joyful, tearful, and a really cool opportunity. So closing out a little bit here, we know that to succeed, the SEU has to be cost effective and cost competitive. The good news is it is. As a municipal utility, which is what we are, we get the weight of the city's AAA bond rating. Of course, we don't have shareholders other than the public. We can take on debt for longer periods. There's just a lot of benefits that we have financially. Now, what is hard is we don't exist. And so a local government goes to a bond market, especially if you've got you can go get revenue bonds. We don't have revenue, right? And so we look like a risky investment. And so startup funds are actually really, really important. And we're in a lot of conversations to get some initial startup funding for those first big capital outlays. Once you do your first capital stack and you start to get your revenues in, then you go to traditional markets. They know what you are, they know how to work with you. But utilities don't start a lot, right? And this isn't procuring an existing utility where I have all these customers like, this is brand new, this is so cool and innovative, and oh boy. So there's a lot of education, and I would say more sustained engagement and collaboration with stakeholders than there are in other systems. We also, and so I talked about this, financing is going to matter a lot. The economics for the SEU, we need to have a certain volume of uptick at the beginning, and we need to have a good interest rate at the beginning in order to amortize the full cost. We have to have an executive director. Someone has to run this. I have to run an office of sustainability. I mentioned we're doing over 70 things. The SEU is one of 70, right? So it is taking a lot of time and attention away from our circular economy work, away from our resilience work and other initiatives we're working on. That's okay, because that's what it needs, but it needs a director. That director, that salary has to be paid for through the rates. And so if you only have 25 subscribers, those rates are astronomically high in order to cover those startup costs. It's why you need to have enough of a rate base to be able to launch economically in a way that makes sense. So all of these are the elements that we're kind of dancing around. As we look forward, some of the things that are critical that I've learned, the importance of expectation management and engaging with the public. If we do not communicate, people are going to fill the silence with their own information. So we just started, I mentioned we're doing these bi-weekly updates. We just started working with residents who are really excited about the SEU to hold neighborhood parties where they're inviting neighbors into their living room, and we're coming and talking to those neighbors. And when I say we, it's really the mayor and I, like we're the only ones out talking right now because there isn't anybody else to talk about it. So we spend Saturdays and Sundays bringing coffee and donuts and talking to 20 people and answering their questions and getting them excited about the SEU or helping correct misinformation. And boy, oh boy, is there misinformation that circulates. It is kind of confusing that there is a little boutique municipalization effort that's in the works at the same time this is launching, because people confuse them constantly. And so having to kind of balance between the two has been really fascinating. We also need to get a wait list. So we have an expression of interest form to really understand what is the public most interested in. This helps us actually with the rate making and going out to get capital to say, look, we've got 1,000 people on a wait list. We have 1,000 unique addresses. Roughly that equates to 20 megawatts of demand that we have in the system. So I'm going to need a capital let of 50 million. Can we do that in this kind of sequencing? These are the conversations that are starting to happen thanks to this wait list or expression of interest form. That was a lot. I'm going to say there's a bunch more on our website. Those biweekly updates are there. You can see the technical reports that we got here. As I close out, I'm going to transition over to questions, so drop them in. I do want to add that there are 2 other sustainable energy utilities in the country, DC and Delaware. They are not this. They are very important. And we spent a lot of time with stakeholders there, understanding what they do and how they do what they do. Largely, they run energy efficiency programs that often utilities run, or they hire someone to run. So DC is getting money from the utilities to execute the energy efficiency programs. That's really important, and they're very, very good at it. No utility in the country does exactly what this SEU is allowed and authorized and expected to do. So we tell people nothing about the SEU is unique. There are utilities that do every single service offering, but there is no utility that only does all of these service offerings, nor is there a utility that does all of the service offerings of the SEU. So in some ways, we have a lot of contemporaries that we can go talk to. And in other ways, we are islanded. And so it's a really exciting opportunity to kind of create something new. And I know I mentioned this before, but I'll end on this. It is all the things that you can possibly imagine. And as you look for your future and what you want to implement, I would say I'm happy. We are always happy to be colleagues and strategize with you all. And the advice I have to give our staff frequently is if this was easy, it would have already been done, right? So this is hard. And it's my biggest frustration is when stakeholders come and tell me something like knocking on a door, do you want to municipalize because it'll be cheaper and faster and you'll never lose power again? And they don't have to deal with the ramifications of talking to the public about a 30-year implementation timeframe or rates that look like this and then move to this or. And so my plea for everyone in this space is to try not to sugarcoat how hard this is, because you will be surprised how many people will come along with you. And you'll be surprised how many people you'll lose if you promise something you can't deliver. So that's my soapbox, and I will stop. All right. You have my done. I'm going to go to the questions, but before I do, was there anything that I completely and totally missed or you hate?
Yeah, thank you, Missy. That was just wonderful and really exciting. And there are a few that came in from the Empower Future team. And one of them, I think you can clear up right away. You mentioned RPS. I'm assuming that's Renewable Portfolio Standard?
Yes, Renewable Portfolio Standard, yeah.
Super. And so, and then you mentioned the microgrid-ish between neighboring households and getting easements for burying lines. And several of the questions have come in related to that. It's how are you thinking about connecting buildings? And is that something, I know here in Colorado, individuals can do a lot behind the meter, but they cannot cross public right of ways. So what's the situation in Ann Arbor related to that, and how are you thinking? Just if you could say some more about that, that would be helpful.
Sure. So it's the same here, right? I mentioned I have solar and storage. When the grid goes down, which it will, I can't run power to Peter and John, my neighbors. Only utilities can. Well, the SEU is a utility, so we're authorized to cross property lines.
Okay, so that's the
fix.
That's the fix, and it's a legal difference between where you
It's
are.
a municipal utility. It's authorized. It did not, in this case, we do not believe it had to be authorized by the voters. We made the call because we had passed, in the way I think about it, we had passed the technical test, the economic test. We wanted to pass the social test. Does the public actually want this? And by doing that, it was, I mean, signed, sealed, delivered. You can sue us if you want to. We will win. I mean, our voters have authorized the creation of a utility.
That's wonderful. And then one of the questions that's related, it sounded like you mentioned undergrounding. Are you going to be doing any overhead between buildings? Do you imagine?
Yeah, it'll be pretty site specific. We are hoping to primarily underground just for vulnerability and resilience purposes. You know, the thing that goes down and when the grid goes down is distribution. A teenager hits a pole, a squirrel climbs up there and chews through it, a tree comes down on it. So we know undergrounding is more expensive to do and harder to isolate, but we're talking such small distribution networks that it's a lot more surgical to get in. So we are hoping to underground. There will be cases where that just won't make sense, but in general, that's the intent.
Okay, here's some others that have come in, and while I'm asking these, I encourage other participants to add or viewers to add to the Q&A queue. So one of the questions from our team is, what will be the electrical interface between the SEU generation and the existing private solar and existing IOU grid?
Yeah, my sense is this is much more of a technical question. My answer is going to be probably too superficial. I don't have our electrical engineers with us that have been helping us with the designs, but if that's something you want to follow up in, I can get more specific. We will have a separate meter. We will have the actual designs are to be determined what systems we'll end up using, but it will, I mean, the first phase is it'll look like behind the meter systems, right? Because that's the first thing we deploy. So it'll look very much like what you currently have, except for instead of feeding into your IOUs meter, you're feeding into our meter. And that's how we're billing you, right? Through that system is what's coming in. So you'll have 2 meters that are feeding. You've got the IOU meter and then you've got the SEU meter.
Right. Thank you. And I think you talked about this, but there was when you listed the drivers for the SEU. But one of the questions is, what is the primary benefit of the city providing energy services rather than a private company like DTE?
Yeah, we very early identified what our pain points were that we needed to solve for. And it was resilience, reliability, affordability, and renewable energy on the system.
Yeah.
And those 4 track across all demographics. They're in different order depending on the demographic that we're surveying and talking to. But there's, I mean, 80% across the board. Those are the 4 that they put at the top of their list. All 4 of them make the cut. So for us, we have really high electric rates. It's not clean. It's unreliable. And with exacerbating climate impacts, it's also not resilient, right? And for us, reliability is like sunny day, you lose power when you shouldn't. Resilience is being able to meet your needs during times of disruption. And so people are generally more forgiving when it comes to resilience, but that's life and death in some situations when people lose medical devices. So we really want to make sure that people can be safe however they need to be safe in that and during those times of disruption. So for us, those were the 4 pain points. When we came up with this idea, okay, so he's not here. I will tell you a story about him. When we came up with this idea, I commissioned like technical experts and we worked over a summer and we kind of mapped this all out. And I was like, I think we can do this. And we had drafted this report that's on our website. And before we went live, I was talking to the mayor and he goes, one of us has to call the utility. And I was like, yeah, we do. We have to give them a heads up. This is coming, right? And I drew the short straw. So I had to make the call. And on the phone, the response I got was, I mean, I think what they actually said was something akin to, why do you hate us? And my response was, that's just too simple. You know, my response was, we're very clear with what our goals are. Do you plan to invest in renewable energy? Do you plan to bring back net metering? Do you plan to make it easy to interconnect? And their response was, that's not our business model. And I said, and that's why we're launching the SEU and we're exploring this, because it's not your business model. So if you want to go in this direction, I got to figure out how to get people out of cars, right? I got to figure out how to get rid of single-use plastic. Like, I got some jobs I got to do. This is solvable. So solve it. And if you won't, you've left us no choice but to solve it. And so that's how we got to that point.
That's a great answer. Thank you. And it addresses one of the other questions about the response of the IOU to the creation of the SEU. Another one is, when the IOU loses power, does the SEU continue to supply power? Okay.
It does. Yeah. That's part of the separation. So when we ran the initial economics, we ran them such that the reason I said it's not really a microgrid, that no power would feed back to the IOU. So that we would actually ground it. You'd have batteries. So we would size systems to really just do critical load. We would not be oversizing in the SEU because we weren't sure how the IOU would play, right? They could make our lives very miserable with interconnections. The rates could be terrible. And so we designed it in what I would call kind of a worst case scenario. Of course, you can always island. We have our own equipment, so we'll be okay if centralized grid goes down. They have actually been pretty delightful to work with. Recently. They understand our grid is at capacity. We're electrifying fast. We're an old system. We're largely on a 4.8 kV network. We need hundreds of millions of dollars of upgrades. Just this year alone, I think there's 300 million coming into the city in upgrades. You know, like, it's an old system. And so the SEU actually takes strain off that system. It actually lets them kind of take a breath to make the investments they need to. And that is a relief. And so they have been willing on, they wrote a letter of support for a grant application that we put in. I mean, I don't think they're like sitting in headquarters singing our praises, but I think my voodoo doll is not getting stabbed as much as it was.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's encouraging. Another question is, our community here in Boulder has been cautious about the question of who will run the utility. Would you explain a bit more about your vision for the governance structure?
Yeah. So I think that's kind of an evolution. We initially started thinking, oh, yeah, like municipal utilities, they just sit outside of government, right? They're quasi. And then we were like, whoa, 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 we're making a lot of assumptions about the sophistication of residents starting a utility versus maintaining a well-run utility with a thoughtful executive. We don't have a rate history. We don't have customer service. We don't have legal support. Like we don't have any of the things. And so we kind of started in this like, oh yeah, that's how it'll work. And quickly when we convened our internal committee, we're like, we are wrong. Like this has to be a department of the city to start if it's going to succeed. And if it's going to succeed in the timeline and with the expectations the public has, because they can tap into communications because we have a communications department. They can tap into legal. They can tap into me and my staff. You know, like they don't have to have a team of 27 people on day one. They can't actually, to be really clear. Like we couldn't have a rate structure capable of launching because you literally cannot deploy enough systems in time for those rate payers to cover those costs. So to make everything balance, we have to start as a department of the city. And I can't imagine being the executive director and not having all of that. Like that would be very hard to stand something up when you are the only employee. You're meant to be the technical expert, the billing. That's just, that's how we got to where we got.
And a related question is, how will the SEU rates compare with the IOU rates?
Yeah, so we have a preliminary rate analysis that's on our website, and I'll drop that link in the chat. You can see the variables, and it's a living spreadsheet, so you can play with the different variables. But we hired a rate firm to confirm before we went to the voters. It is dependent on the interest rates, and it's dependent on when we launch, like what our actual generation is, because that's how we'll amortize the rates. But assuming everything looks the way it's looking right now, they will be cheaper. Solar will be notably cheaper. Batteries will always be a premium. They will be notably cheaper than a generator. And when you factor in time of use rates and how we're able to manage that, they'll never hit an ROI well, I guess I shouldn't say never. That's just not why you do it, right? Like they're comparable with a generator in terms of service, but so much more. So solar
reliability.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Solar only is cheaper. Solar and storage is cheaper than getting a generator, and of course, more benefits from it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And just for our viewers, the resources that Christy is going to be giving to Empower Future, we will put on our website so viewers can access them. It's another question. It sounds like the engines behind this movement are your mayor and your personal efforts. And for example, you two going to neighborhood parties, what other methods of public engagement and expectation management have been effective?
Yeah, it is true that we held the SEU pretty tight when we were out in public engagement. We also did have a very strong traditional municipalization movement. And so things were getting very confusing very fast for people. So we had the city administrator, myself, the mayor, and our communications director. We were the four that talked the most about this. We gave all of our elected leaders the talking points, the fact-based talking points on what it was. We made sure all of my staff knew because we're out in the public. We host over 200 public events a year. So people are going to come talk to us about that. But there were certain questions that everyone could answer. And then anything more than that came to one of the four of us. Since it's passed, I think that's a little legacy that the four of us know the most about it. And so we do tend, and it's the mayor and I tend to be the ones who talk the most to people. Broadly speaking, we talk about it all the time. Yes, we do neighborhood parties. We have these biweekly updates. It's in almost every slide. I spoke to our architects today. They had their monthly educational sessions. There's about 150 of them. I was talking to them about the SEU. I think it's just, this sounds so silly. It's like a child to me, that like I'm having some heartburn as it's fledging, to be honest with you, because it's lived up here for so long that like it's hard to say goodbye. But I think someone probably picked up on the fact that I really love this child. I'm excited for it to thrive.
Thanks. What's the difference in the customer experience and rates if the customer rents the assets from the city or finances or buys the assets from the city?
The customer will never rent them. The city will always own them. So
Okay.
that is difference, right? It will always, what'll end up happening is the city will pay all of the costs to install an SEU asset. You'll just pay per unit of production from that system like you pay today. So it'll be per kilowatt hours of what you're pulling from that system. At the end of life, city takes down, replaces, like you don't have any capital outlay, right, in that. So that's kind of the experience from the SEU. We do have, and I have some examples of this, we do have expectations that not phase one. Phase one is putting up those systems. Phase two is the SEU buying assets that already exist. So the option can be, I could sell my depreciated solar and storage to the SEU, I get a check up front, and then I start paying that bill again, right, for production when I'm pulling from the SEU. I could also choose to sell to the SEU. So any excess I generate, I'm grandfathered in Michigan didn't metering, but it will go away in a few years. At that point, it may be advantageous instead of getting and selling at a significant loss to the IOU, I sell to the SEU because my neighbors have subscribed. And so I'm literally selling my electrons to the SEU and they are going next door to my neighbors who cannot do solar. So we have started the economic analysis and the work on that. That looks to be totally viable and doable. It all comes down to the economics of the microgrid and how many people subscribe and the cost of that wire and the associated software to be able to connect. We just have to make sure those rates work, and that technology is changing pretty rapidly. So I'm sure by the time we launch, those costs will look different than they look today.
Great, thank you. And how is your IOU addressing the planning for buying generation for uncertain load that the IOU will face due to unpredictability of intermittence and of grid failure? Our IOU would likely use that as a reason. I'm not quite sure about how this is typed. Would likely use that as a reason they could not support their role as a backup power source. Oh, our IOU, meaning the one in Colorado.
Yeah. Well, a few arguments we'd have. Assuming most of you are in Boulder, yeah, you're an important user, but like as important as Ann Arbor feels like it is, we're actually pretty small for our IOU. We're not Denver, we're not Detroit, right? And so we're 3 to 5% of their total usage. Like we do not kill them. And we have the highest solar adoption rate. We just passed a 5% residential solar adoption rate in the city. Y'all, like, that's better than New England. We are chasing them down. I'm sure you guys are better than us. We're coming to get you. But we're already doing it. We also are electrifying really fast. We have the highest electrification rate in the state, whether that's through vehicles. My office incentivizes people to transition away from fossil gas. So we give rebates, just like they do in. So we have a carbon tax. It's not a carbon tax. It's a local climate millage that funds a lot of the work very, very similar to you. So we were out in Boulder with your team and in Denver talking to people because you have similar mechanics in place to figure out how to structure those. The point is, it is already the Wild West of uncertainty, and we intervene in those cases and can challenge them pretty significantly by saying, whoa, pause. Right? You already struggle over here, and we're going to guarantee that this like peak demand we can cover through these systems. Like, so we haven't, oh man, I welcome that fight. I can pull some data and modeling to challenge that if it comes my way.
Okay. Great. Do you expect to have different rates for different times of day?
We do not at right now. So like when the sun is shining and not, no, because you're paying per unit of production from the system. You're not paying, it's not a 24/7 power provider, right? It's supplemental. So we may for geothermal because that's a much more stable system, but we're not sure yet there. But no, we don't anticipate having different rates for different times of day. We will have different rates for different rate classes and different customers for sure.
Okay. And another question, are you able to use the same poles as the IOU with your own wires?
Depends. We actually own some of the poles. They own some of the poles. We could, but we don't really want to use the poles if we can avoid it. Most of our poles are outdated, and so it's not really good infrastructure to work with. Moreover, we don't really want a lot of things run above ground.
Yeah. Okay, good. Another question. Net metering was initiated here in Colorado to kickstart solar adoption. This is favorable to solar installers. As a result, there is an installer resistance to eliminating net metering. Did you say that net metering is going away in Michigan? And what would drive the move away from net metering?
Net metering's gone.
Yeah.
So we do not have it. If you got solar today, you would have what's known as inflow outflow. So our electric rates are about 19 cents per kilowatt hour. You would get compensated at 8 cents for sending anything back to the grid today. So batteries make a lot more sense. We are seeing last year alone, almost 50% of every solar installation had a battery. I mentioned our grid isn't reliable, but also why are you selling back at a loss, right? Like you're using it, and time of use rates are 26 cents an hour when you come home. So like you're filling that battery with your solar and discharging at those times. So we already have lost net metering.
Okay, great. So those are the ones that have come in through the chat. There are a number on the Q&A, which I think you're able to see. First one was from KK DeVivier.
I'm reading that right now. Is it Colorado law?
If you can read it out loud, so the recording.
Sure. This all sounds great, and I would love to see it happen in Boulder. However, it seems that the biggest issue or hurdle is that Colorado law differs from Michigan and that it doesn't automatically allow a city or town to compete with an IOU. Do you agree? And if so, then maybe we need to work with our legislature to amend our laws. Unfortunately, I don't know your laws in the same way. We did have that technical advisory committee. I had 5 advisors and one was a lawyer, an energy lawyer. And I would say it's a really good investment to have someone who understands the laws of Colorado. These issues are almost never black and white. You'll be playing in the gray a little bit. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't yet, just to get someone to kind of take a look. And then if the answer is not really, then I think you're right. If you can do a legislative change, most people, the utilities will fight it for sure, but most people agree that you should have choice in your market. And that's the argument we certainly leaned pretty heavily on. Okay, next up. Situation in Arizona is similar to Colorado. Hi, Shelley. The city of Tucson commissioned a feasibility study of muni power and community choice aggregation, very similar to where we were. Both models show lower rates than the IOU, but CCA isn't authorized in the state yet, and muni power is pretty untenable for the reasons Dr. Stults mentioned. SEU seems like a great alternative, but we don't know if it's legal. How can we find out? Through our Attorney General's office? Very similar question. I want to loan you our lawyer, but I will name she's a Michigan lawyer, so it's probably not going to be that helpful. I would say if you are looking for a quick start in either wherever you are across the country, the Sabin Center at Columbia University and Amy Turner in particular are really, really good lawyers on energy issues. They're not going to be able to answer your question like day one out the gate. They are going to be able to direct you to good resources. And we've also had fabulous collaborations with our academic partners in our law schools, having the students actually investigate some of these questions. And so I might put some of your brilliant minds to work to look at law and come back. Why not, right? Build a new generation of activists. Let's see. Keep going, Chris?
Please. Yes, please do. Yes.
Oh, no, it starts with loaded question. This makes me nervous. Okay. Loaded question, but that depends on what options here you exercise. Oh, boy. In Colorado, putting up solar plus storage on contiguous property is just fine. Solar gardens, also fine. Connecting wires directly between different homes across other rights of way is not. We do have third-party aggregators allowed here, but that's still in process. So that gets to this question of we usurped all of that by becoming a utility. We have all the rights of a utility. And because we did not become the sole provider, the 365 24/7 provider, because we are a supplemental provider, we actually get a lot of benefits too. So that's how we circumvented not having CCAs. And actually, we can't even do, before we became a utility, we couldn't even do community solar, because while the legislature said it was okay, it's only if the utilities want to do it, and our utilities said they don't want to do it. But now we're a utility, so we can do it. Let's see. If the state would eventually enable CCA, would the SEU just become another third-party supplier to the CCA? In other words, how would that transition take place? That's a very fair and good question that, sadly, I don't think I have to worry about in the near term. We had a chance at CCA passing in a Democratic legislature, and that it didn't even move. We're back to split House and Senate, and it's not going to move. So would love to do a bourbon exercise with you at some point and think about that, but probably not on my top 10 list of things I have to worry about, sadly, because of it not moving. FYI, net metering is moving to time of use here in Colorado. Okay. Oh, can you tell me about your professor contact at the law school? I also have students research these questions and would love to collaborate if possible. KK, I am happy to connect you to some of the legal folks. Give a sense for the value of loss load, dollars per outage, for your non-residential small businesses and commercial and industrial partners. If so, how are those losses distributed across that sector versus your residential? So I'll start by saying we really don't have industrial in Ann Arbor. It's just based on how the city develops. So for us, we have institutional, commercial, and residential are our primary rate bases. And do we have a cents dollar per outage? It varies across the different sectors. We know a little bit about that. There's more work to be done. We do have a history of filings before the Michigan Public Service Commission, where they've explored this question of what the cost is for outages at different sectors. And so we would use that as a base point. Luckily, as a smaller footprint, we also have really strong relationships with more of our partners to be able to understand that in greater depth. For example, we know multiple restaurants closed a few years ago, 2 years ago, because we had multiple consecutive days without power. And then I think we went 5 days without power in certain areas. And then 2 months later, lost power for 3. And so a lot of our restaurants lost everything, right? They lost freezers twice, and they just didn't have a reserve. So I think we lost 3 or 4 local restaurants from that. So part of the analysis that my team does, not necessarily from the SEU, but from our other work, is, working with different stakeholders to understand what critical load is for them. A hospital's critical load is obviously different than a restaurant. Your critical load is different than my neighbor Frank, who's on medical devices, critical load. And so really figuring out how we maintain that critical load for our stakeholders is part of the essence of the SEU.
Great, thank you. And I would encourage viewers to add any additional questions that they have. We're getting close to the end. I will now switch over to some of the questions that have been put forward by the panelists. One of them now is, how does the SEU manage the customer use of the electrons produced by the solar and stored by the battery? Does the building owner consume all it can, or does the SEU manage consumption? Does SEU sell any excess back to DTE?
Yeah, good question. Lots of layers there. So at the beginning, the way to be determined. So this is the way we're thinking about it right now. I reserve the right to change this if the systems change. It will be per unit of production, like what you're pulling from that battery is what the individual is charged for. So that does give some, almost certainly, I imagine we'll have some flexibility and some control that we'll want to maintain as the utility, since that is a utility asset. But we also want the resident to be able to manage their kind of use profile. They're out on vacation, they have family in town, time of use rates. Like we need to have some flexibility in that. So that's from the utility standpoint. In terms of what will happen if there's excess in that system, in the first phase, excess will go to DT. It will be sold, and it will be sold from the, let's pretend it's Scott, because I see Scott. It will be Scott selling, Scott getting credit on his DTE bill. So he's paying the SEU for per unit that's coming out of that system, because that's how we're metering it. If he's using it, he gets it, that's what he's paying for. If he's not and pushing it to DT, he's paying the SEU rate, but he is getting credited from DT because those are going on his bills. We haven't yet had a collaboration with DT where they would pay the SEU. that could come in the future, but this is the simplest way that we can navigate in the short term. Once you start getting shared systems, meaning you can network, or maybe I do a battery that's for a neighborhood, then you have a different system, and that's an SEU asset. Chances are it's distributed across those assets. Nothing is pushing back to the IOU.
Are there plans for DTE to compensate the SEU for microgrids or simple solar plus storage, or deploy at weak spots in the DTE local distribution system, which delays maintenance costs for the distribution poles and wires?
Yeah, right now, no. So all of our economic analysis assumed no support whatsoever. And in fact, actual opposition, like a lack of desire, or PERPA rates being what we get, right? Like make this, I'm recognizing I said this in an earlier, and I don't think I said it to y'all. I think I said it in a previous webinar I did, that we didn't try to sugarcoat the SEU. We tried to do all of our analysis, not worst case, but a pretty bad case analysis. We got no discounts. We did residential rate pricing, like individual, no bulk discount for volume. We did labor rates that were high. Like we ran an analysis to see if the rates could even work, if nothing works, right? It's just like vanilla. And it did. And so this is one too where we assumed no support from the utility. They're sort of like, we don't want to touch this. And so if they do, and we find collaboration, it just makes everything more economically viable.
And I have a question you may have answered, I may not have caught it, but the SEU can continue to provide power if the IOU grid goes down. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
Great.
That's our resilience feature.
And one other housekeeping question here. There's a request for you to repeat the center at Columbia University.
Yeah, it's the Sabin Center, SABIN.
Great. And another question here from a panelist that says, how are you managing RECs?
We are retiring them. I mean, we're keeping them all bundled with the generation. There was some conversation about this. I am not a huge fan of separating the two because our goals are very, very clear. So I don't want to sell RECs only to go to the market and buy RECs. So we will consider them a bundled asset, and they will be retired and counted towards the SEU and our shared goals.
Great. So if we go back to the viewers, Missy, you'll see there's yet another question.
Q&A? Okay, great. Excuse me. So just to be clear on the microgrid, are you suggesting that you will act as the distribution system operator for the microgrid controller and the minimum assets to implement that, or are you that far in your investigation to say that? Almost certainly that is correct, that we will be managing the network, the microgrid network itself. We are trying to figure out exactly what that looks like in terms of what the controllers are, what the hardware and software systems are to do that. We did secure a small, I mean, it's 5 million, so it's not super small, but a grant from the state where 1 million is for staffing costs for the SEU, 1 million is for like all the contractors and support that we need, like the legal support, the rate firm, and 3 million is to do a very mini pilot VPP, which will also have a microgrid element so that we can kind of build the physical infrastructure, but then test. So we're thinking like 10, 15 homes in a low income neighborhood that we'll test some of this out with the hardware and software. So do not yet know the answer, but know that these are directionally where we're trying to get.
Great. A question from a panelist, do they have a coordinated plan for resilience hubs?
Oh, I love our resilience hub. So we have 3 active resilience hubs, 3 more in the works as we speak. Our resilience hubs are, they're not emergency shelters, right? They are community-facing locations that provide 365 days a year of service to residents, meaning even during times of disruption, they're capable of functioning. So it's unclear in the 4th resilience hub we're working on. It's actually not far from where I live. We are making some decisions right now about whether they install their own systems and my office, like my day job, helps fund those systems, or whether they become SEU subscribers and they use additional capital to do some of the other things, more of the programming and local food generation and that they want to do. So we haven't made that decision yet. They're going to look different, probably. We're working on, we have We have a climate crisis, we have a housing crisis, so we collaborate quite a lot with our housing commission. There, the conversations are pretty rich. There are certain sites that they think they're going to own. There's some sites that I think will be SEU assets. So that's an emergent area, and it probably in the short term, being like next 2 to 3 years, will be a little bit more contextualized to what it is we're trying to do. And then I think we'll figure out a rhythm and a way it works longer term.
Right. Another question, what about the situation to provide energy when there is no solar for the SEU? For example, when there's winter weather or multi-day storm, when the grid goes down.
Yeah, so a few questions sort of hinted at this, and I will answer the specifics of that question, but this is a supplemental utility. So there is no requirement that this has to provide power, period, right? Like it's part of the novelty. Now, of course, you don't want to be incapable of providing power, right? But that's the IOU, the 365 power provider has to provide the power, right? That's sort of the challenge. So this is kind of a nice sweet spot to be in. It means we can be really creative and do the renewables. And as the technologies get better, stack more and more things on to make sure we move closer towards a 365, 24/7 power provision. But that is not where we have to start, nor is it realistic to say that's where we will start. So in cases like this, the answer is you'll probably have some energy during these time periods because, of course, the sun is still shining in storms. It's just not generating much. So you have a little bit that's coming. Your battery could be powered for sure and dispatch over time. If we've got a microgrid, we might be able to like stack assets and move them around. If you're geothermal, we at least have some thermal potential there, and maybe we redirect whatever is being generated in the storm. Whatever energy we're able to get from solar, we redirect just to the heating elements, to be determined. But we are not walking in and telling someone when centralized grid goes down and we've got a big winter ice storm that moves through, you're fine. Like that's just not realistic.
Okay. So going back to the viewers Q&A.
Oh yeah, another one. Yeah. How are you planning to power the resilience center? Is there land nearby for a solar farm so it would be separate from the IOU? Most of our resilience hubs already have enough solar and storage to handle 3 days with 0 generation. So, and again, that's in most cases not realistic. Even if a winter storm moves through, chances are the sun is doing something in those time periods. And also in the summer, the sun is still out. And so they can go 3 days solid with no, like if the batteries are stored, they're ready to rock. And that's already installed on the resilience hubs that we have. Those systems also are not light users. Most of our resilience hubs, we've made the choice to invest in existing community centers and community serving institutions. So that includes the largest food pantry in the county, which is, distributing significant amounts of food every day. Lots of freezers and coolers, lots of refrigeration. So big draws, right? You could imagine in a true crisis, you might curtail a little bit of your load. So we did not design for curtailment. We designed for full 100% operations, 3 full days. And every site's been capable of handling that so far.
Wow. Okay, you started with city goals. Does the SEU get you there by 2030?
No. But no thing gets us there by 2030. Everything gets us there by 2030, which I'll just share. Welcome to the joy of doing this work. The biggest experiments humans have ever done with the planet, also in terms of climate change, also necessitates some pretty creative experimentation on how to combat it. So no, there's not. Wouldn't that be nice if there was one thing that we could do to hit our clean energy and climate goals broadly? But it's just simply not that simple. We have to do it all.
Okay, there's yet another question in the Q&A.
How do you place or prioritize resilience hubs? Resilience hubs, for us, we made the decision early on that we wanted to make sure they were community centers that were already used and activated by frontline populations. So we haven't built anything new. We didn't build a new community center. We leaned into centers that already do food distribution, that already do after school programs, that are deeply trusted by stakeholders like our BIPOC residents, our, I'm trying to even think like where are our resilience hubs. So we've got Bryant, Peace, our senior center is a resilience hub, and then Northside Community Center, those are our hubs. So our philosophical approach is 365, they have to be providing a service that people already use. It's no benefit to us to invest in physical infrastructure that people don't trust and won't activate. So lean into where there's already trust, there's already service provision, and then make sure they have a longer runway to keep doing what they do. So that's why we've chosen community centers to start. We're talking to our libraries as well about possibly being resilience hubs. And then even today, our resilience lead and I were talking about the activation of resilience hubs. Like, what's the MOU say they need to look like? We don't put much demands on them because they're already doing incredible work. So we are open to anyone coming in and being a resilience hub, but a resilience hub is not an emergency shelter. So like, we just met with a bunch of houses of worship that really want to be overnight sheltering and they want to have resilience for that purpose. That's great, but that is not a resilience hub to us. That is an important asset in our system, but we need 365 service delivery. We need something that is like an anchor of this work in order for us to classify it as a resilience hub. And I can send the website, that's all public if you want to see how we philosophically approach that work.
Great. So
there's another one.
More questions coming.
Yep. Did they come to you then, or did you seek them out? The resilience hubs. The very first one, it's a longer story that'll say when we launched our A20 plan, it's got 3 core values that drive it: sustainability, equity, and transformation. And from an equity standpoint, we knew we were going to fail a lot. And of course we do all the time. We went to one of our community serving institutions and basically said, would you like to work with us on this? Like, this is how we see it overlap. And then we said, when they said yes, very graciously, we said, how about we do something really crazy? And we just like focus on this neighborhood that is our largest concentration of poverty in the city, and just start working and figuring out, like, what does it look like to hit these goals with the residents. And the residents over time, we've been working with them for 4 years, they set a goal of being the first carbon neutral existing neighborhood in America. And we're going to hit it. I'm 100% confident we're going to hit it. Their community center is the Bryant Community Center. It's the largest food distribution site in the county. It does after school programming. It provides critical services. It's just like, it's a beacon for the neighborhood. And so we decided that they would be the first kind of in the system. And more than that, actually, they are a resilience hub. So they have the services, they have flood control, they have fill in the blank, like they've got the things that they want and they help define that. In addition, we are in the process of making them a living learning lab of what decarbonization looks like. So residents can come in and see the technologies interact with everything, make this much more personal and demystified. So that's been pretty exciting. Like, we had the rig out there doing the geothermal drilling, and youth can come up and see it, and we can talk about disruption, because this is the neighborhood we're doing network geothermal in, right? So it's been really exciting. It's a hard project, and it's a really great project. Last one I see. In the SEU, is the SEU throughout Ann Arbor or mostly in one area? If spread out, is there any electricity interchange between areas? So the SEU mirrors the franchise footprint of the city. So it's the whole city, but it cannot go outside of the city. It has to be the electric service territory that would be covered in the franchise. In that case, most of the SEU assets are decentralized assets. That's part of the strength, right? From a resilient standpoint, is decentralization. We could, I'll end that. So we are not thinking big systems. We are thinking much more decentralized systems.
Great. I'm going to read this one to you, because you shouldn't necessarily read your own praises. And James Gilbert says, this is exciting. Missy, your passion is contagious, and I am so impressed. I love Boulder, but I would be proud to live in Ann Arbor. Thank you so much for your time.
That's so kind. Thank you very much. And Ann Arbor welcomes you with arms wide open. Plus, I love Boulder, and I'll be out there in October, so I'll see you all then.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, do let us know that you're here. And there is one remaining panelist question. Could the SEU operate at break even, not at a loss, if it could only deploy solar plus storage on single owned buildings, i.e. no cross-property microgrids, asking because Boulder cannot deploy cross-property microgrids without a change in the law?
Sure can, actually. The economics are probably better by not doing microgrids, to be really clear, because behind the meter system's already pencil. So unequivocally, yes.
Great. Missy, thank you so much. I see that we've caught up with all of the questions. You've done a terrific job. This is a tour de force that you represent for us, and it's really, we'll be looking at the video again and again and again. I know that you know, when you watch videos, you can sometimes speed them up. I'll be looking to see if there's one where you can slow this one down. You definitely covered a lot of territory. You're really an asset to Ann Arbor and to the rest of the country in your pioneering work in this area. Thank you for sharing your time with us. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve. Everybody go have a nice cold beer and enjoy that glorious Colorado weather.
Okay, great. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Stults. Really appreciate your enthusiasm. It's awesome. I really want to thank the other Empower Our Future communication team members who are integral to making these Empower Hours happen. They are Paul Cullen, Chris Hoffman, Steve Whitaker, and Julie Zonizer. And a special shout out to Scott Miller, who initially made the contact with Ann Arbor. One last thing, want to remind you to mark your calendar for June 17th, when our Empower Hour guest will be Alan Best, editor and publisher of Big Pivots. And also, again, a reminder to sign up if you haven't provided any testimony to the Public Utilities Commission on the just transition solicitation. That would be super. Do it soon. You need to sign up by June 5th. Again, thank you, Dr. Stults. I do want to say that I hope you continue to not have too many pokes in your voodoo doll from the utility. Thank you.